Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, in association with Max Allan Collins, presents True Noir from the Nathan Heller Casebooks, the first 10-episode series, The Assassination of Anton Cermak, is coming, a fully immersive audio drama. We are going to be crowdfunding starting May 1st. Production begins May 27th, and you'll be able to see the world premiere in a movie theater at the San Diego Comic-Con in July. Very exciting stuff. Well, to be honest, I've been working my ass off on it, and I think it's going to be great. But hopefully you'll support. You'll see the entire process on this channel, and it's going to be very exciting. Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the perhaps never to be defined, but people have come close. Existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I'm, of course, Robcasting at you from right here in the Rob Observatory. You, Robcasting at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 961. 961. Thank you all for being here. You know, this has been an odd week. I've been working on a lot of different extracurricular activities. Obviously, the audio drama. You know, there's a lot of production involved. We're actually recording the 10 episodes beginning May 27th, and working on casting all that. There's a lot of roles. I think there's 36 speaking roles, and we're casting all of those. And a lot of logistics going on. I'm still working on finishing up White Devils, waiting to get the final sound mix, which is due at any time, which is very exciting. So doing a lot of extracurricular work. That's why I've only done a few Robservations this week. I like to do 3. I think I've only done 2, but I'm doing more. And then, you know, there's a lot of, not that the world isn't already weird, but there's a lot of weirdness. I get a lot of weirdness thrown my way. And I would say in the form of people that are usually disappointed in me for a variety of reasons. But lately it's kind of new. I've been getting a lot of people contacting me, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's just via email or whatever. And people have been telling me, expressing a lot of disappointment in me. And they're mad at the company I keep. They're mad at my political ideas. They're mad for whatever reason. They seem to have put me in some, whether it's on a pedestal or in a box, or they expect a certain thing from me. And I've let them down somehow in some way, shape, or form by being friends with somebody they don't like, having Russell Brand and the Critical Drinker at the front of this show, whatever it is. But it's very specific, usually. And I'm always sort of taken aback by that, because I would like to think that I have a wide range of interests and ideas, and the whole point of this channel, the entire reason that keeps me going on this channel is to share ideas. It's for the free flow of ideas. And whether it's, I mean, you're listening to my ideas, I would assume people are here because my ideas, hopefully, if I don't have the best ideas, at least it sparks something in you to come up with your own ideas about whatever. And I'm here to foster some kind of a dialogue. And it's always interesting. I never get people who want to, they're always telling me what's either wrong with my opinions, telling me who they don't like. They're telling me all of these things that they perceive to be wrong with me. But no one ever really asks, why are you friends with those people? Why do you believe the things you believe? And it's not like I'm just wandering around the world willy-nilly. I mean, I spend my day, I'm a seeker. You know, I want to find out, like, what's over there. I've never been on the other side of that hill. You know, I'm constantly reading. I'm constantly, like, I got consumed. I heard an NPR story about what's going on in Sudan, which is, you know, another war-torn area that and facing famine, and many, many people are losing their lives, and all kinds of craziness is going on. Hadn't heard a word about it. Certainly no one's telling me about it on social media. There's only one conflict people seem to be interested in when it comes to me. And a lot of them don't like my opinions, and then they go tell everybody else. In fact, people I think are interfering in my ability to create programming simply because they perceive my whatever they perceive as being wrong, which is very odd. Like, it's very odd that I've never in my life ever once thought that I would try and interfere with someone else's ability to create or do their job because I didn't like their opinion about something. But we live in this world today. It's very, and I'm a public figure, I guess, in a small way, and I'm online. So if I disappoint them, I hear about it, or they tell other people, or it's very odd. It's a very odd situation, considering I've always, if you have a problem, you want to come on my show, and some people have asked to come on my show just to shoot the shit, and that's not, you know, as we all know, I've let random people come on this show a lot before. Maybe tomorrow night. Dave Parker's coming back tomorrow night for Midnight Metal. We're going to talk about the movie he directed and a lot of other things. It's 420, dude. But I mean, it's not like I haven't let people come on the show, but there's some people that mistake. I'm like, if you want to debate me or you think I have a really bad take, I'm happy to bring you on. But a lot of people never take me up on that. They just want to come on. Hey, I'd love to come talk about this. Right? That's a different thing than, you know, because it is my show and I can't just let anybody, hey, let's talk about Godzilla movies. Okay. That's why I let people write me letters and send in super chats or tips or whatever, so you can express your opinion. But I don't know. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's just been an odd week. But as I'm wont to do, and a productive week at the same time, I've been thinking a lot about movies. I think a lot about movies only because, like, being on the John Campea show, we talk about the news of the day. And of course, Martin Scorsese making a Sinatra biopic with Leonardo DiCaprio and J. Law is very interesting. You know, but I think about movies for me in terms of, like I've said, movies are the art form of the 20th century. You take all the previous human art forms, you have the added twist of technology, electricity, things that weren't possible 200-300 years ago, and you've created cinema, which really does belong to the 20th century. And I've maintained that I really think it will be supplanted by interactive entertainment, whether it's going to be deep learning AI or whether it's going to be things like Unreal Engine, whether we're living in holodecks. It's all going to be interactive based and tailored to the individual. It's going to be a different thing. I think passive entertainment might be something of the past. I still quite enjoy it. And on one hand, while I might bitch and moan and complain about Star Trek, and especially like Star Trek Discovery, which I'm not going to talk about, I have no interest. I keep watching it, and I'm like, I'm thoroughly not engaged by Star Trek Discovery in the least. On the other hand, there are shows like Shogun, you know, which I had my knives out for because I love the original from 44 years ago so much. But I think it's a terrific, terrific show. Darth Plato might have a differing point of view because he knows more of the actual history, but I've quite enjoyed the drama of it all. And oh, Marco, Anyway, it's a terrific show. There's lots of terrific programming on. There's a lot of great stuff. But, I wonder, the business of movie making has been completely obliterated. The actual economics and business of how movies are made has been completely upended. And, I wonder, and I've been thinking a lot about this, I have a Thursday night get-together with some friends that I've known for a long time, and they're kind of scattered to the winds now. They don't all live in California, and so we get together and we talk. And last night we had a conversation that was a little bit depressing because some of my friends were all older. We'd been in the industry for the better part of 30-plus years. We started out as young whippersnappers, 22 years old, being a PA on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. I'm much older now, 3 decades in. And I never thought that I would get to a point where my ideas are just not welcome because of who and what I am, which that was something I never considered. And, to be fair, I still work in a small arena, small pool, so I can still continue to make what I want to make. We will finish White Devils. I am doing this audio drama with Max Allen Collins, and we're going to continue to do these things and create work, and I can continue to opine on YouTube and all of that, but trying to get back into the larger industry where other people have to allow you in. I mean, there are people that are going to tell you whether or not that you can work here. It's been really interesting because whether you're good at your job is no longer part of how our activist culture really does exist. People have your talent or your ideas have been completely supplanted by an activist bent to the work that's being done. There is no, especially when I like working. I've always worked with older people and younger people, but the younger culture now is very different than it was when I was young. When I was young, we were always looking toward the people that were more experienced than we are to learn from. That is not the case anymore. There's not a lot of people who respect, you might have institutional knowledge and worked in the business for 30 years. No one today cares. They really don't, because there's no sense of history. And there's no sense of history, I think, in our culture at all. And I don't know if that's because it's a failing of modern education. There's not a lot of people that, especially, college age people in their 20s, one of the things I thought was really interesting for me personally was when I started watching Star Trek. Star Trek led me to other things. It led me to, because Kirk recites some of the great foundational documents of our land in episodes like the Omega Glory, which was not a great episode of Star Trek. We, the people, they must be for everyone. And it, as a kid, you're like, okay, I got to go read this. And as I watched movies and television shows, I wanted to know what those movies and television shows were referring to in the larger context of the world. So as a seeker, I have to know about this. I have to know about this. I have to know about this. And in a pre-internet world, when I was a little kid, that's why I loved encyclopedias so much, because my parents bought me a World Book encyclopedia set from a traveling encyclopedia salesman because I would always use it. I was always down there, I heard about this, and I would look it up and read about what it is. And when you have a general knowledge about the world that you live in, it allows you, like, the entire world is an interconnected. It's like the world itself is a giant brain of all this interconnected stuff that begins with human behavior and it leads to everything that we've created in history and nature and all these things, and it all plays into your daily life. And the more you know about things, and I mean, you don't necessarily have to be able to write a PhD paper on things, but if you have a pretty good working knowledge of things, when you go out into the world itself becomes a richer place because you don't take things for granted. You can, like, I always find myself when I'm in another city, sometimes you look at the corner of buildings just to see when they were built. I don't know why, but it's just something I picked up. The first time I went to New York was 1990. That was 34 years ago. And my grandmother was appalled because she was from New York. My step grandmother, who I loved dearly, Sissy Schoenfeld, and she was appalled that we'd never been to New York. And she was a wealthy woman. She's like, well, I'm just going to pay for you guys to. So she sent my sister and I to New York on a trip and put us up, and we went to see Broadway shows and gave us a bunch of money and said, go have a good time for a week. And New York was a magical place. I mean, it was amazing. And my sister and I just wandered around the city. Talk about sensory overload. We had an agenda, like I want to go see this and I want to go see that. And we went to all these places. We literally and my sister, like me, we'd go into bars and go meet people and have a few drinks, and then go somewhere else, and we'd meet people and be like, oh, you should go over here, we'll take you. And that was the kind of life I like to lead. I started traveling or going overseas, I would do the same kind of thing. But nowadays, I don't get the sense that people are particularly interested in the world, not the way that I feel like we were when we were younger, and maybe that's because I'm old, and I don't know, maybe that's not true anymore because, we've got TikTok and there's so much information coming at you all the time, but I don't feel that people are processing the information in the same way. Like I see from the film perspective, there's not a lot of interest in the history of cinema. Speaking this is my 9th year on YouTube. April 14th was my 14th. It was my 9th anniversary. The 14th of April is my YouTube anniversary. And I can tell you, having been on YouTube now for 9 years, I have watched and being a movie pundit and talking about movies, whether it's comic book movies or not. If I were to tell somebody that one of my favorite superhero things I've ever seen is The Adventures of Captain Marvel, the movie serial from the 40s, people would be like, huh? What? And they wouldn't be particularly interested in that. But it was, Shazam, Captain Marvel. And when I tell people that, they look at me like, wait a minute, there was a Captain Marvel serial in the 40s? Like, I mean, it was black and white, so you can tell he's wearing the suit, but it's Shazam. There's people, they're not interested. They find it interesting, but no one's watched it. And I do this show, and I should say that my audience, you guys watching now, are a great audience because I'm constantly getting stuff from people. I read this book. Nothing makes me happier than if someone said they actually watch this show with a notebook or a notepad, because I just randomly say stuff that I don't even know I'm saying. Oh, you should check this out, or I love this movie, or they write it down, they go find this stuff, they write me back, and they're like, they want to know, like, I watched this thing, I didn't love it as much as you did, but what is it you liked about it? And I love all that, and that's kind of the great joy of doing this channel, is to sort of spew all this stuff that is stuck around in my head. I mean, you imagine what it's like to walk around like me with all this stuff. I mean, Elizabeth thinks I'm in a complete fog most of the time. She's like, what are you thinking of? And I'm like, well, there's this 1960s movie that stars Roddy McDowall. I think it's called The Wild One. It's set in Palm Springs. It's a teen film, but I don't own it, and I want to own it. And she's like, that's what you're thinking about right now? I'm like, yes. And then I realized The Wild One's like a Marlon Brando biker movie, and I have an action figure from that, but it's not. This is The Wild Ones, seriously. And Elizabeth's like, you're always in a fog. And it's true, because there's so much to learn and find out about and hear from people. And anyway, what is this episode about? You're probably wondering. But so anyway, I've been thinking about the fact about, like, are movies even relevant the way that they were relevant to me growing up? Because for me, movies were all about the human experience, sort of codifying what does it mean to be a human being and live in this world. And I know that movies are fiction, but as I've always said, the best fiction is truthful. There's all kinds of great truths in the best fiction. That's what verisimilitude is all about, the quality of being real. And even though something is made up and is completely fictitious, if it has verisimilitude, the people that created it have imbued it with enough reality that you can learn, your mindset is such that you will learn something from this about the world around us. And I think all the great stories, I had an ex-girlfriend of mine that used to criticize me for reading so many novels. She's like, all you read is like novels. And I'm like, yeah, but the best novels seem real. Like when you read a Tom Clancy novel, when I read Red Storm Rising, that was the first Tom Clancy book I ever read. I was like, man, this is, even though it's about World War III, it was so authentic. It felt so authentic that I'm like, I feel like I'm getting smarter reading this book. You know, or when I'm reading something like Donna Tartt's The Secret History, which I've talked about a lot on the show. I love that book. But it's a different kind of an experience. But you feel that you're learning something about human nature that is real, even though she made it all up. I mean, it was based on things that she knew, but you made it all up. And I just feel that the thing about that is that we were looking outward, and movies were something you looked outward at to find them, to experience them. And I didn't do it. I was not like, well, show me what you've got. It was more like there was this stuff out there that was made to be seen and experienced. I had to go find it. You know, it was my job to find it. It wasn't supposed to come to me. And now, of course, we've got all these streaming services and the internet and stuff. And in a way, it's different. You know, I don't have to go out and get it. I can just have it come to me. I'm like, I can go and look. I found this movie and you can get it in Italy. You know, and go to Amazon and it'll show up on your door. So, I mean, you still have to make the effort. But there's something different about how when all this stuff is coming at you, when you had to go out and get it, when you finally got it, and I truly believe this, I've talked about this about movie theaters, and I know a lot of people have bad experiences in movie theaters and all that. You know, in LA, we were lucky. We had the ArcLight. You would go, and it was a theater for like-minded people. You pay an extra $5, but you knew that when you went there was not going to be anybody pulling out their phone. No one's going to be, you know, talking or texting during the movie because everybody wanted the same experience that you did. And they went to this theater and paid the extra $5 because they wanted the experience, and that's what they're paying for. And everybody knew that. So, you know, you could go in there, and when you have that theatrical experience, your mind is open. I believe this is just a Rob observation, or what's the equivalent of Rob theory. And I've said this before on the show, that when you open up your mind, what you are seeing penetrates the gray matter more. You know, the sensory deprivation of being in a movie theater means that your mind is much more focused on what it is that you're watching. And I find that when I watch these streaming shows, sometimes I forget 6 months later that I watched them. But when I don't forget movies. Anyway, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about, but I think I'll start with this article that I found in the New York Times Magazine. And I read this today, and it really interested me, and I think I'm going to share it with you tonight, because why not? It's my show, and I can do that. Here's the article, and as I look at this, I didn't do such a very good job setting this up to make it a little bit more, bring it out, make it there. Well, that's not very good either. Hang on. Let's just put it like, you can't see what I'm doing because I'm fucking it up, but don't fuck it up. You follow a guy on Instagram that cook. I love that guy. Don't fuck it up. Okay, so here's this article. It's by A.O. Scott. You know, I've been reading A.O. Scott's work forever. And here's the article. Is it still worth going to the movies? After 23 years of film criticism, I was back in front of the screen as a civilian, and I had no idea what I would find. And this article was written on October 9th, 2023. It was in the New York Times Magazine by A.O. Scott. Link in the description. Until this summer, I hadn't been to the movies in more than 23 years. What I mean is, even though I had seen more movies in that time than just about anyone, I know it had always been for work. Part of my job as a film critic for the Times. Even when I just bought a ticket to go out with family or friends, I never felt as if I were off duty. I saw movies in the company of my fellow critical clock punchers, sometimes in specially taped off rows of regular movie theaters during sneak previews, sometimes at festivals, usually in screening rooms tucked into Manhattan office buildings. And then one day, like a wary gunslinger who has seen too much, I decided it was time to ride off into the sunset. In March of this year, I published my last movie review and walked away. After spending 21 weeks reading books, studying the weather, and trying to learn a new musical instrument, I felt sufficiently purged of my old habits to return to the movies like a normal person. In a curious coincidence, this happened to be the very summer that all the other normal people were returning too. We all went to see Barbie and Oppenheimer. The movies were back. That was the headline anyway, thanks to the Barbenheimer phenomenon. Two hotly anticipated, heavily marketed features released on the same day, with a combined running time of nearly 5 hours and no connection to a franchise cinematic universe, and together earned almost $250 million at the North American box office on their first weekend in theaters. In an earlier era, this might not have been news. A hit movie, even two hit movies at once, hardly constitutes a historical event, but this felt special, largely because of the sense of an old normal reinserting itself into a precarious and confusing world. Barbie and Oppenheimer had collided with the assumption that cinema was over, or at least movie-going as we'd known it was obsolete. Even before the pandemic, we were told that streaming was the future, a seamless, convenient, welcoming utopia of endless content. All the movies you could want, whenever you want, wherever you are. Once COVID-19 shut down the theaters, this latest technological disruption began to feel like serendipity. I had to admit there was some magic in streaming. Partly because of my job, I'd always identified movies with movie-going, even after most of the movie audience had adopted a more eclectic, platform-agnostic approach. During lockdown, confined to a smaller room with a smaller screen, I found myself alone in a vast digital cinematheque. Untethered from the schedule of new releases and review deadlines, I watched whatever came in hand. One morning, I inhaled Being John Malkovich twice in a kind of Gen X lockdown fugue state, convinced that it was the key to everything that had happened or would ever happen in my life. In the first pandemic year, watching movies, always a solitary as well as a social pursuit, and mostly a job, became something like reading, or reading the way I did as a precocious child, ransacking my parents' shelves. I was promiscuous, obsessive, impatient, uncritical. Maybe there was no need to go back into the dark rooms. Maybe there was nothing worth seeing there. As the pandemic began to recede, prophecies of the end of moviegoing continued. The emerging conventional wisdom declared that audiences declared that while certain blockbusters might still attract large audiences to theaters, the future of the art form was decisively asynchronous and homebound. Going to the cinema would be like reading poetry or listening to LPs on vinyl, a niche activity, the expression of a cultural stance that combined aesthetic principle, philosophical protest, and just a hint of preciousness. As a 2022 headline in Filmmaker magazine put it, "Cinema is dead, and we're all its ghosts." The death of movies has been proclaimed for almost as long as movies have been around. A partial list of the forces that have threatened their existence over the past 90-odd years as a business, as an art form, as a pastime would include sound, color, communism, anti-communism, sex, no sex, the studio system, the collapse of the studio system, cable television, the internet, video games, superheroes, and film snobs. None of these actually destroyed the movies, but the fear that something will, the certainty that something already has, accounts for a strong undercurrent of fatalism coursing through the language of movie love. For more than 125 years, as the movies have expanded and multiplied onto more and bigger and also tinier screens, from the Nickelodeon to the CinemaScope to the iPhone and iMacs, the feeling has persisted amongst some of their most passionate and sophisticated partisans that they're actually withering and shrinking. In Sunset Boulevard, Billy Wilder's inky, cynical Hollywood noir, the silent film goddess Norma Desmond, played by the silent film goddess Gloria Swanson, laments that the pictures have gotten small. That was in 1950, in the midst of an era that would soon be remembered as its own larger-than-life golden age. Start talking about movies and before long someone will complain that they don't make them like they used to. They never made them like they used to. Our cultural memory cherry-picks the good stuff and brushes away the dross. It constantly revises its own judgments, letting masterpieces slip into oblivion and discovering lost treasures in the trash pile. The movies themselves change from decade to decade, generating instant nostalgia. In each phase of their existence, they have mutated so drastically, literally changing size, shape, and appearance, as to elude definition altogether. I used to think that a best of times, worst of times feeling was a part of the professional deformation of being a critic, someone compelled not only to pass judgment on the merits of a particular movie, but also to weigh in from time to time on the future of cinema. Or maybe, more subjectively, it was my own ambivalence that projected rosy or crepuscular light onto that future. To see 300 or 400 movies a year is to know the keenest pangs of movie love and the deepest depths of boredom. And it's easy enough to mistake the fluctuations of your own mood for the tectonic rumblings of cultural history. But none of that is why the movies are so wonderful, and so awful, so magical, and so dispiriting. The real reason is something we don't like to talk about: money. In her classic essay, In Hollywood, Joan Didion asserts that the real art form in the film industry is the deal, implying that the movies themselves are a byproduct of the creative work of financing and selling them. What you see on the screen, the star, the CGI effects, the location, the shot, is the afterimage of an economic decision. Why pretend otherwise? Like every other 21st century discourse, modern movie love leans on quantification, on metrics, on math. Critics are not supposed to care about how much something cost or how much it earned, but the truth is that budgets and box office grosses supply us with useful information. At every level of production, filmmaking has always been a capital-intensive undertaking, and movie watching has always been a consumer activity. Before streaming, when we talked about blockbusters or festival favorites, Oscar contenders, or popular genre sensations, money was always at least implicit in the conversation. It served as an index of success and failure, a way of gauging, a way of, it is gouging, no, a way of gauging audience response and measuring cultural importance. And not only for critics. On any given week in the old days, you could glance at the box office charts and the television Nielsen ratings and feel as if you knew something about the state of the art and the mood of the audience. Not everything, and probably not the most important things, but you could find a way to articulate what was more important in opposition to those numbers. Your own preferences and practices acquired a context. You could swim with or against the currents of hype, enthusiasm, and groupthink. The social life of movies was inseparable from their bottom line fortunes. Streaming isn't the same. Like many digital technologies, it has rattled the laws of capitalism and thrown out the old ledger books. Its defining transaction is the purchase not of a ticket, but of a subscription. Along with the price of access to content, the consumer grants the kind of surveillance that has become the digital norm. Your data is collected and fed into an algorithm that knows what you watched, how often, and for how long, and that stacks up fresh offerings based on your viewing history. Netflix will ask you who's watching, but won't tell you who is watching along with you. This minor alteration of consumer habit has turned out to be a major cultural disaster. Not the death of movies so much as the eclipse of their shared meaning. Just as streaming isolates and aggregates its users, so it dissolves movies into content. They don't appear on the platforms so much as disappear into them, flickering in a silent space beyond the reach of conversation. We can watch them whenever we want. We can watch something else. It doesn't matter. It certainly doesn't matter to the platforms whose business model depends on a state of indifferent attention, paradoxically known as engagement. As long as we're still watching Netflix, Netflix doesn't care what we're watching on Netflix or whether we're also texting, working, dozing, or chilling. Doesn't matter. Quality, prestige dramas, works of auteur cinema, cherished old network or cable shows may be the reason we subscribe, but quantity is what will keep us there, each in our own content cocoon. The manufacture of this content has disrupted the old ways of doing business. The deal-making arts that enchanted and appalled generations of Hollywood observers, the movie industry was never famous for fairness, transparency, or honest accounting. But there was a coherence to its chaos. Stars knew what they were worth. Filmmakers and writers knew where their money came from. There was some up front with luck, more on the back end. A share of the box office, a cut of the DVD or broadcast rights, a higher budget next time around. In television, there was syndication money and the stability of steady employment on a long-running show. The labor unrest that, along with Barbenheimer, was the big movie story of the summer, arose out of this instability. The writers, who ended their strike in September after 148 days, saw their standard of living erode as the streaming boom cooled and were alarmed at the potential encroachments of AI. The actors, who are, as of this writing, still on the picket lines, but have gone back to the table, face a similarly precarious landscape. The convergence of AI and franchised, formula-driven screen stories make it possible to envision a world in which writers and stars will be fewer and cheaper and maybe ultimately unnecessary. The strikes were one form of protest against this future. The crowds lining up for Barbie and Oppenheimer were another. I am not naive. Buying a ticket to a Warner Brothers release made under the auspices of Mattel is hardly an act of anti-capitalist resistance. But it is a way, I think, of taking back some of the democratic energy that has always been part of mass culture, of claiming a participatory share in the cultural economy. The movies are, once again, not dead. Art forms are more like viruses than animal species. They don't become extinct, they mutate, recombine, go dormant, and spread out again in new, sometimes unrecognizable ways, which carry memories of older selves encoded in their DNA. Going to the movies may not always be a magical journey. More often it means contending with parking, concession stand lines, yackers and texters in the next row, sticky floors, and dim projection. But it has long been an object of sentimentality. The number of movies that fold in primal scenes of rapture at the cinema is beyond counting. Babylon, Empire of Light, and The Hand of God are among the most recent I can think of. Artifacts of the streaming era pointing backward toward previous golden ages. Elegies for moviegoing and prayers for its return. Some of the wistfulness comes from the idea of moviegoing as yet another symbol of the collective life we supposedly had before the atomized, polarized present. Remember how we used to do things together? Shop, worship, watch sports, go to the movies? We didn't really. We were always polarized, divided, and alienated. That's what it is to be modern, to be human. What made the movies matter, not any particular movie, but the movies as such, was that they captured and reflected this condition in a way that nothing else had. The communal embrace of the theater could also provide a profound solitude, a liberating anonymity. If streaming is a form of surveillance, moviegoing is the opposite. It can feel like a secret. What did I think about Barbie? About Oppenheimer? I can't tell you. We go to the movies to lose ourselves, to explore a world that partakes of our common reality and also departs from it. No other narrative art can get as close as the cinema to the variety, the texture, and the skin of daily life, the critic John Berger wrote in 1990, around the time of film centennial. But its unfolding, its coming into being, its marriage with the elsewhere reminds us of a longing or a prayer. A prayer is uttered by the congregation. Movies are made by corporations by the combined efforts of artists, technicians, financiers, and deal makers, and completed by the audience. They are variously amazing, mediocre, corrupt, visionary, and stupid, but their intrinsic qualities matter less than what we're able to make of them. They feed us lies, myths, propaganda, and nonsense, which we alchemize into wishes and dreams. Or to put it another way, They are commodities that we consume with our imagination. In this way, Barbie, the movie, is a lot like Barbie the doll. We humanize them as we use them to discover our own humanity. They disappoint us because we disappoint ourselves and enchant us for the same reason. Our continual worry over their death is projected anxiety about our own extinction. They're alive because we are, and maybe also vice versa. I can't believe I hadn't read that article until I found it to read on the show. And I kind of believe that. And I'll tell you something. Something occurred to me. I don't know if any of you collect physical media. I mean, I know some of you who watch the show do, and you know that I collect a lot of physical media along with Dieter Bastian. I do a physical media show, and something recently happened in the physical media world that caused quite the stir. And the stir was the release of, 3 James Cameron titles, if you want to include Titanic, 4, that recently came out under Disney. They were Fox titles. You had, of course, Aliens, True Lies, and The Abyss. And in the case of True Lies and The Abyss, they had never come out in HD before. And they all came out in 4K, and there was a stir because the look of these movies and whether we got the optimal versions of these releases was called into question. And a lot of people even came after me. I mean, Robert Harris, the great film restorer, said he liked the way Aliens looked. I also watched Aliens and quite enjoyed it. A lot of people, a lot of my peers, a lot of people I respect, and I would assume a lot of people who respect me lost some respect for me because I said I really enjoyed the way Aliens looked. Now, here's the thing. The master they used to master Aliens, normally the optimal way to go back, and especially with a movie that was made with photochemical processes, meaning every movie for like the last 100 years up until the last 20, if a movie was shot on film, the most ideal way to deal with it is to go back, hopefully, to the original negative. Now, when you handle the original negative, you have to put it on a machine and scan it frame by frame or run it somehow. What you're doing is you're taking one medium, you're taking a negative that's meant to be turned into a print where light is shining through it. It's running at 24 frames a second, and the persistence of vision. Remember, movies don't move. They're a succession of still frames that project at a certain speed, 24 frames a second. Persistence of vision creates the illusion of motion because of the way we perceive the world. So that is a whole different when you're sitting in a movie theater watching a movie. That's one way to watch a film. When you take a film and translate it into a different medium, like the electronic medium, you're basically transmuting one thing into another, but the finished product is still a movie. But then you get into the philosophy of it all. Like, do you want to try your best? In my mind, what you want to do, my rule for transfers, for movies transferred to home entertainment formats or TV or streaming or whatever, is you most want to preserve the intent of the filmmakers at the time the movie was made. Now, here's something interesting. My beloved War of the Worlds, my first favorite movie, 1953, George Pal. The Martian war machines that come out of the gully in that movie are some of the most beautifully designed alien spacecraft, most malevolent looking, scariest motherfucking ships ever in any movie. However, at the time, the only way they could do that is there was, I think, 48 various wires, fishing line, whatever, holding on to the model. And when you're watching a new transfer of that film, you can see the wires. They're right there. So now with our technology, now here's the thing. When a transfer is done properly, you get the great colors and everything. And you want to retain what it looked like when the filmmakers made the movie. But the filmmakers themselves, if George Pal were around or if Byron Haskin, who directed the movie, was around, he would tell you, I wish we could have taken out the goddamn wires. Well, in the modern age, they did. Now, the question would be, as a purist, I'm a purist, I would say, no, I think you should have left the wires. I'm like, fuck no. I absolutely believe that they should take the wires out. And they did. And it makes the movie better. But it's not the way the movie was made in the day. You've now eliminated the wires that existed. But when you see the wires, I mean, and as technology got better, our television standard, the way I saw War of the Worlds, was garbage for so long, 640 by 480, with interlaced video that wasn't even the full 425 or 525 lines you could get or whatever. It was fucking terrible. Our TV standard was terrible. So when we started to get HD and now 4K and things like that, 4K will probably be the last home entertainment medium in terms of movies. Gaming will take it up higher, but because we'll need more realistic imagery, but to convince us what we're seeing is real. So it'll go up to whatever K it's going to go up to. But movies pretty much are going to stop at 4K, even though, yes, I know if you went to the TCM festival, you might have heard David Fincher say, well, we restored 7 and 8K. Yes, I get that, and we'll be seeing a down conversion in 4K. I know all about it. The fact is, what are you going to play an 8K disc on, bruh? What are you going to do? But anyway, so the question is, War of the Worlds, one of my favorite movies, was my first favorite movie when I was a kid. I'm all for taking the wires out. And the filmmakers would be too. Now then, okay, Rob, if you believe that's the case, why don't we go back into all of Ray Harryhausen's movies and do CG creatures? The beasts from 20,000 Fathoms can be far more, or Earth versus your beloved Earth versus the Flying Saucers. You don't have to watch stop motion flying saucers anymore. You can get like Leitmotiv and Roland Emmerich's company to give them outtakes from Independence Day and it would look better. I would say no. The difference is the art itself. Harryhausen's stop motion was the film. You could, of course, if you wanted to, go make it better, but then people might even ask me further and go, okay, but why is it okay to remove the wires from the Martian War Machine and not change Ray Harryhausen's art? Well, I would say because the wires holding up the War Machine were the only thing that they could use at the time, and they would have not, if they had something better, they would have. They didn't have anything better. Whereas the stop motion work of Ray Harryhausen is the art. So in my mind, I know it's a thin line. People might say I'm splitting hairs, but I'd like to believe that there is the art of the time. And in the case of the Martian War Machine strings, it's like no one wanted to see those strings anyway, not even the filmmakers. Let's cut back to Aliens. So the thing about this new transfer of Aliens is they do not go back to the negative, the brand new negative. They didn't. They went back to a transfer that was done over 10 years ago. A 2K master. It's not a 4K master, but it was a beautiful from the negative transfer in 2K. Now, a lot of our movies, but not 4K. A lot of our movies we've seen 2K up-reses on disc. Some of the earlier Marvel movies, they didn't finish them in 4K because the effects work. So we've seen things that look terrific upscaled to 4K. But when you have if you're going to do James Cameron movies, well, you'd want them to go back to the original negative. I would too. However, the original negative, because the film they actually used and the way it's grainy. So even the original 2K transfer, so they used modern AI technology to change the look of the movie. It's hyper real. It looks different than it's ever looked. And I'm going to tell you, as a purist like Robert Harris, I sat back and I put on that Aliens disc. Now, I should object to it just on principle that they didn't go back to the original negative for whatever reason. I'd be like, fuck that. We didn't get a true 4K experience. But I would say this. People are like, well, it didn't look the way it looked when I was watching it on a home video. Well, when you're watching it on a home video, most of the time, Aliens came out in 1986. Since it's been on home video, it looked like fucking garbage. Up until when the Alien Anthology came out, we finally got Aliens on Blu-ray, 12 years ago or something? So up until 12 years ago, Alien looked like shit. I mean, it looked better on DVD, but it certainly didn't look like it looked on VHS. And then it didn't look, and there's a great Alien Theory, by the way. If you look up, I was mentioning this the other night, Alien Theory on YouTube does a great comparison and shows these comparisons. So the thing about Aliens, when I was watching the 4K, it was a new experience. It was something new. And like Robert Harris said, I like what I saw. You know, it took out a lot of the things that used to bother me about the movie, such as some of the graininess in the dark, the rear projection elements, some of the visual effects. But I think this new version of Aliens moving forward is quite good. And for audiences discovering the movie for the first time, highly effective. Now, did they change things? Yes. Should I like it? No. But I do. What that says about me, I don't know. You know, they haven't sent me the goddamn Abyss yet because for whatever reason, I did finally get my Conan box set for those of you who are keeping score at home. And that, I don't know if they reprinted more, but that went missing for like months. Thank you, Amazon, for finally giving it to me. But hopefully I will eventually get my Abyss. True Lies I'm not so much interested in because I've got a Spanish bootleg disc that was ripped off TV. It looks pretty great. I mean, I might get around to buying it anyway. Oh, did I say I have a Spanish bootleg of True Lies? Yes. Because you can get it for a long time. Sue me. You know, but anyway, so it's all a process, I guess. But anyway, this article, the thing is, these debates, people love movies. I was watching it was Colin Farrell was promoting his new TV series it's on one of the streaming shows. And he was asked, and he said this is the first time he was ever asked this. He said, the interviewer, I think it was on a Fox channel or something, I don't remember. I saw it on YouTube. I tweeted out the link so people could watch it. Because I love Colin Farrell. I don't care what anyone says. I'll live and die in LA. I'll live on or die on the hill that Michael Mann's Miami Vice is awesome. And I love Colin Farrell as Sonny Crockett. He's great. But anyway, so Colin Farrell was asked, like, what is the movie you've watched most in your life? What is the film you look back at? And I figured, you know, Colin Farrell in Bruges, even The Penguin. I mean, and the fact that he, you know, was in Miami Vice. You know what he said his favorite movie was, or the movie he watched the most was? Back to the Future. And I was like, it's not just because it's a genre title. I do think Back to the Future has one of the great screenplays ever written. Tight as a drum, man. That plotting in that movie is not plotting. It's not plotting, Plotting. Fantastic. What a movie that is. It's such a tight. Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis knocked that shit out of the park. That movie is one of the best written genre films ever. It's so tight. And it's great. And I was surprised. I don't know why. Why should that surprise me that Colin Farrell, maybe because it goes against type or whatever, but it made me really like him. But here's the thing. We all have these favorite movies that we go to as comfort food, that we've incorporated into our psyche. I don't know anybody my age that has grown up without movies that they know either backwards and forwards, movies they put on and watch over and over again. And, you know, as kids, the next generation after me, people grew up with home video and they watch movies 100 times. Kids watch the same stuff over and over again. I think millennials and Gen Z might be the first generation since cinema has existed, certainly in the home video era. And home video began in the late 70s where people could actually rent tapes. But in the home video era, it became everybody could curate their own ongoing film festivals. But now, again, people went, I mean, yeah, you watch movies on cable, but when you got home video, you went to the video store. You made the effort. And if you found something, it meant that when you got it home and put it in, you had made a choice and you'd had to make effort to do it. And you'd gone somewhere. And so when you sat down to watch whatever it was that you got, you took it seriously, man. And of course, we didn't have the cell phones that we have today. We didn't have as many distractions. You might have been able to get up and take a leak or get some popcorn or whatever. But when you had to go get that movie, it meant more. And I'm not saying people watching cable, you know, I loved HBO and Showtime and all that, the movie channel. I was into it. And it was good, and I did watch multiple movies multiple times, but you didn't have 100 fucking channels. You know, you didn't have 10,000 things that were streaming. A cable channel in the 80s and 90s had a schedule, and you could catch multiple showings of your favorite movie. You know, I remember one of my favorite things in the 80s was to get the monthly schedule of what was going to play on cable. You know, and you could watch a movie if you wanted to 10 times. And you'd get it's still, and people would incorporate their favorite movies into their worldview. They'd say things and correct me if I'm wrong, just think of whatever some of your favorite movies are. There are scenes in those movies that you've incorporated into your own life. That the way the characters reacted or what they said or responses or something. That you are a part of the tapestry of it makes you who you are. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case anymore. Certainly not for younger people. I don't think movies have nearly the impact of, say, someone like Mr. Beast. You know, and I get it. And I'm not pillaring the younger generation. It's just different. Movies are a form of entertainment where you have to go out and meet them. We now, especially the newer generations, don't want to do that. Things are coming to you. You know, and so, and you're the center. We're all making TikTok, well, maybe not all of us, but TikTok videos or YouTube videos or Instagram reels or whatever. We're more at the center. The reason that, look at the rise of YouTube. You know, Joe Rogan, he's the attraction. He used to be the guy that was at the, ringside, the announcer man. He had his own interests. He was on comedy shows or whatever, but now we tune in to him. He's the everyman who's bringing all this parade of these people that, that you watch, but he's become the epicenter, one of the most successful people in the history. I mean, I'm sure if Johnny Carson knew what Joe Rogan probably makes, or the kind of money that he was paid on Spotify or whatever, insanity. The world is a much different place because Joe Rogan's worldwide. YouTube has made everybody global. Those that, I'm not saying that I'm global, but I do have people can watch whatever country they want to watch this in. It's just a different world. I don't necessarily think it's a better world. It's just different. I think the fact that people are less inquisitive, I think that people want to know less. I mean, the funny thing is because it's not just money that makes the movies go round, but now money is making everything go round, and now everything is quantified by cash, which I think is a mistake. I've often said on this show that I believe that the beginning, and no one's going to say this, but I think that in America, the first line of defense is to make sure that we live in a healthy and well-educated country. I would say as a national security issue, our education system should be baller and not contingent upon any economic forces at all. And I know it's expensive to keep people educated and pay teachers and all that, but even teachers today are more interested in pushing their own agendas, whatever they might be, rather than make sure that their students, like, I'm going to push my whatever agenda it's going to be on my students. And I'm like, why would a teacher admit that on social media? I would want to make sure if I was teaching that my students had an incredible foundation of basic knowledge that they could build on. I wouldn't be so, like, I got to tell you, I knew I had teachers that were straight. I knew I had teachers that were gay. They never brought any of that into the classroom. They were almost ciphers, and I've said this. They're bringing information that was not their information, but the information that we needed to know, whether it was economics or social studies or biology or history or civics, whatever the fuck it was. The teachers were the conduit. They were not people that we were recognizing. The teachers were there, and I remember when I would see a teacher outside of the classroom, I was like freaked out, like, oh my God, teachers, they're real people. Like, you never had a sense of that. I never would have told you. I remember I had a teacher named Chip Wall who I loved, and Chip Wall was a Vietnam vet. Now, there were occasionally I was in a gifted class where they teached me stuff, but he had like ELP, the extended learning program for quote unquote gifted kids. But I remember he didn't talk about it, but I was aware that he was a Vietnam vet. and he saw some shit. He was in the shit, in the NAM. And he didn't talk about it. I mean, he might have mentioned it once or twice, but it was not something that we were aware of. If he suffered from PTSD, I never would have known it because he was busy teaching us. Nowadays, I see teachers with their own agendas, which freaks me out. I'm like, if I saw a teacher that was pushing their own ideology or agenda in school, get them the fuck out. You're not doing your job. Your job is not to bring yourself to your students. Your job is to bring the education. You're a conduit. You're not a thing. You shouldn't be affirmed by your students in terms of who you are. And if you're not a conduit to them learning about the world around you, you could say, well, Rob, they are bringing... No. And I know that because I'm seeing less smart people in the world. And if teachers were doing their jobs, we wouldn't see certain things happening in this country that are happening in terms of our levels of our measurable levels of education. And it's not all bad. You know, I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm just saying that for me personally, it's a bizarre idea that teachers, like, we didn't know our teachers, nor should have we known our teachers. I remember I would get, if I was friendly with my teachers, it got a little weird. Like, oh my God, they're my friends. And if I fuck up in school, anyway, I'm kind of off in the weeds now. But anyway, movies, like this article said, driven by economic forces, you know, and the question that I have as movies sort of, again, it goes back to Yuval Harari's question at the end of his book, Sapiens. What kind of world do we want to live in? And I think movies make human existence better. But the problem is, that's because it was a collision of art and commerce, and you still had the people that were making movies were interested in the art of it all. You know, a guy like Sidney Lumet, you know, was a fantastic director. He made The Verdict. I was talking about The Verdict. Sidney Lumet wanted to make that movie. Somebody probably brought it to him. But, you know, if you look through his career, you can see he had a predilection for certain subjects and went after it. It was part of his art. It was a good thing. Nowadays, almost all movies are products of economics. Not that they weren't at some point, but they were a clash between the two. You had artists on one side that wanted to make movies. We're seeing less and less of that. There are less and less movies about what it means to be human. And certainly at the studio level, you're looking at spectacle. You know, you're not looking at, a studio is not going to make one of my favorite movies, All That Jazz. They're not going to make that movie. They're just not going to do it. You know, you'll get a musical in the form of a Joker movie. So, anyway, let's see what you guys are saying, because I have not a clue. Is anybody even watching this show? I don't even know. I haven't been paying attention. I love when I come up for air, I stop talking. I'm like, wow, there's over 500 people here. Well, cheers to you. All right. Let's see what you guys have to say. I'm going to go down and find out. Let me go back 1 hour. Here we go. Bert says, happy birthday, R&B. That didn't take long. Blazin' Asian says, happy record day, sir. People are becoming more tribal nowadays. Kudos to you for remaining open and having a nuanced opinion. Well, I try. Some people would say I'm a neocon that wants to see the destruction of whole regions, which is nothing could be further from the truth. Darth Plato is an imagination connoisseur, and he's been a member of this channel for 40 months. He's our official historian. Kinky Sphincter, of which I have one, and that's all good, let me tell you. Kinky Sphincter celebrates 40 months of membership. That's cool, Kinky Sphincter. Thank you for that. Skiz Spivak Esquire has gifted 10 Burnettwork memberships. There's no member call tomorrow, as you know, but there will be next week. That's very nice of you, Skiz Spivak. We have great member calls. They're lots of fun. Chairman Meow sends in a $20 super chat and says, I was in middle school when Free Enterprise came out. I convinced my mother to rent it because it was Star Trek. Needless to say, it was a bit awkward watching a few scenes with my parents. I loved it. Yes, it was definitely R-rated, Chairman Meow. And I'm glad you loved it. And hopefully it celebrates its 40th. It celebrates its 25th anniversary on June 4th. Maybe I'll have a party. I think I will. Maybe I'll have a watch party. Eric K says, happy birthday, RMB. Well, thank you, Eric K. My real birthday is May 15th, which is less than a month away. I don't know how we're going to celebrate, but it's going to be a fun show, I can tell. Skiz Spivak Esquire has been a member of this channel for 7 months. Thank you for that. 1001 Johnny says, part 1. So Industrial Light and Magic has many works listed that they have proved special effects. However, they also have 2 animated films coming out this year, Ultraman Rising and Transformers 1. Yeah, because now they're doing full animation, which is cool. I mean, Ultraman Rising, I didn't realize that, but that's amazing. So that's amazing. Thomas Logan says Paramount gives you $100 million to direct a Trek movie. The caveat is it must star Colm Meaney, no problem with that, and run 3 hours. Do you accept? Of course. And what's the movie about? Well, if it's starring Colm Meaney, I would make it a Deep Space Nine movie, and I'd make sure the script was solid. But I would probably, to make it allegorical, I would look to some of the Star Trek novels. Deep Space Nine got blown up, and they had to rebuild it. They had to rebuild Terok Noir. And I would probably tell a story about, it would be a transition. It would be a transition to a changing time of something happening. And, whether it's Bajor, make it a story about Bajor entering the Federation and the intrigue about what that means, or re-entering the Federation or something. I mean, you'd have to make a story, a Deep Space Nine story if Colm Meaney is going to star in it. He's a great actor. Maybe he comes back to Deep Space Nine and he comes back and gets an, I mean, to be put on the spot, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to think about it, but I would definitely make it some kind of a transitional story that deals with a focal point in Federation history, not necessarily a wartime focal point, but maybe it has something to do with Bajoran's spiritual outreach, or maybe it has to do with the wormhole aliens revealing themselves to the galaxy, or maybe they're petitioning the Federation to join. What happens when you have a non-corporeal entity decide they want to join the Federation? I don't know. I don't know what that would look like. I'd have to stop and think a lot about how I would do something like that and what would go on, but it's something along those lines. 1001 Johnny says, part 2, these aren't their first animated films, but we tend to think of ILM, known for their live-action special effects work, as animators. Isn't this an awesome thing to be able to be so versatile? I hope they have a long history in making animation-based films. Well, I would say this. Special effects have become CG effects are animation. So you look at what they did for Transformers, there's very little live action in the Transformers movies that were the visual effects. The visual effects were mostly CG based. So the fact that they would now be rendering entire environments, it's just an extension of what they've been doing for the better part of 50 years. So I think it's cool. I mean, ILM was always very versatile, and they were always at the forefront of technology. Major Chai Chai, how are you? My Gen Z kids have demanded I take them to the theater to see Studio Ghibli films whenever they're playing locally. Well, you've been a good mother. You've definitely been a good influence on their lives. So that's good. That's very impressive. Kurt Pullen says, Rob, you're amazing. I just watched Late Night with the Devil on Shudder. Dope stuff. Movies are getting trippier, and I can't wait to see what's next. Movies have always been pretty trippy, but A Late Night with the Devil is good. There's a sophistication to certain horror films that we're seeing premise-wise that are pretty unique, which I'm loving. Captain Robert April says, editing this fan film retrospective is reminding me why I didn't go into television. It's hard, isn't it? It is hard. Our friend S Beam has been a friend of the channel for 41 months. He celebrates 41 months of membership. Hello, S Beam. Hello, Rob. I see that new wave vending machine. I just got mine last week. I love it. I never thought I'd have a 6-scale vending machine, but it will be a prop for sure in some upcoming stop motion. Yeah, the Coke machine, that's a new Coke machine from the 80s, and there's little tiny cans of Coke that come out of it. It also is a working freezer. I have chocolate bars in there right now. Because it gets hot in here during the day, so I put them in the I chill them. I chill my chocolate bars. But it's great, yeah. And I just got what I got. I got Berserk. I got to take out all my new wave games and set up like an Anthony arcade, because I have a lot of them. You can't see it, but I guess no more there. I mean, I have Centipede, Tempest, Asteroids, Missile Command, 1942. Dragon's Lair, Berserk, Ghosts and Goblins. I don't even remember what else I'm missing. I didn't get Dragon's Lair though. I should have got Dragon's Lair. I didn't get that. But yes, you got to use it in stop motion. Andrew says, Rob, I'm sure you've stumbled across Patrick H. Williams' channel. He's doing great work. He really brings a nostalgic yet optimistic flame to movie making. I have watched some of his stuff. It's good. You know, there's a lot of great creators on YouTube now that are definitely worth watching. RRTNZ says, Chuck Norris got a PhD in math for solving an unsolvable math problem with a single word, violence, because he can solve any problem with violence. It's true. Unlimited Power. So I forgot to bring your apes. I forgot about that. Unlimited Power celebrates 3 months of membership. Hey, R&B, you forgot to show off my Migo apes on Robservations the other night. Do you think the new apes are too grounded for a psychic mutant? Okay, so Unlimited Power did send me pictures of his collection of Planet of the Apes figures, which it's funny because you can get new Migo Planet of the Apes figures that look like the old Migo Planet of the Apes figures. But that's a really good question that Unlimited Power has for the apes, because as we all know, the original 5 Planet of the Apes movies had John Chambers, Planet of the Apes makeup. And clearly it was human beings in apes makeup, but it was really great groundbreaking apes makeup. But the thing about the apes makeup is it allowed you then to have mutant humans that could reveal themselves to their god, the atomic bomb, the alpha omega bomb. And with the new CG photorealistic apes, could you get away with having mutants, psychic mutants? I think you could. Because I think in our mind's eye, the reason that the modern now again, you'll have to go with me on this one. The reason the modern apes movies work, I mean, they're photorealistic apes, they're amazing, but the fact is they talk. And I think we knew when in 1968, when the first Planet of the Apes movie came out, and then we watched them into the 70s through Battle for the Planet of the Apes, even though we knew they were people in makeup, we still bought them as apes for whatever reason. So when we saw a photo, and I was worried about this, as a Planet of the Apes dyed-in-the-wool, one of my favorite franchises, certainly when I was a kid, when I went and saw Rise of the Planet of the Apes, I'm like, am I going to buy this? But once you see the apes talking, it worked. Even though they were photorealistic apes, it's like, okay, I'm right there. When I saw the apes, it was fine by me, and I didn't even have a problem. Like, as far as I'm concerned, they did it's a magic trick. But the modern now quartet of Planet of the Apes movies with Kingdom, I believe that those apes movies are the precursor to the 5 original Planet of the Apes movies. I think they work. I buy it. I do. I buy it. Maybe other people don't, but I buy it. I totally buy it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I buy it. Hunter Becknell says O'Brien would have to be treated like crap in some way in order to stay in continuity. Well, I don't know. I mean, he's earned his stripes, hasn't he? Tom Jr. Jackson said, but that's funny. Tom Jr. Jackson said, I sent you a letter in the mail. I hope you like it. Well, I haven't gone to the mail today, but I'm sure I will like it. Cyan Hagiri says celebrates 18 months of membership. So thank you for that. Justin Martin says, do you prefer TV or movies as a medium? Movies, 100%. And part of it comes from, I mean, TV's fine. I like TV. And the way we have streaming shows now, I mean, are incredible. Like watching Shogun's incredible. But movies, because of that sensory deprivation idea, that you can sit in the dark and watch movies, is something I'll never not love. RRTN says, hey, Rob, I met John Noble at a con last week. Great guy. Clearly he loved making Fringe. Told great stories and also did some Denethor lines for us. Nice. He's amazing. He's truly amazing. That would be so cool to see him do Denethor lines. Well, listen, I wanted to talk about, obviously I want to talk about Star Wars. And I had an article I found, I'm just looking for stuff. Thomas Logan says, would have been worse, Keitel as Willard or Stoltz as McFly. Both are bad. I think they dodged a bullet. Eric Stoltz wasn't right, and Harvey Keitel could not have been Willard. They knew. I think they were both equally bad. By the way, I heard Eleanor Coppola today. I know she passed away, but an interview she did in 1992 for Fresh Air, Terry Gross played it again today. I know it's cliche to say, it's cliche to say I love Clockwork Orange. It's one of my favorite movies. It's cliche to say I love Apocalypse Now and The Godfather and all that, but Apocalypse Now is amazing. And I was reminded again today that there was no ending, and they had to craft that ending. They made it up. I mean, they just didn't write it. They made it up on set, and they wrote it together on set. It's amazing. I love Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now has a verisimilitude that will never, ever, 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 ever be seen again in any movie ever. It's both stylized and it's realistic, and it's got peak verisimilitude all the way around. And the likes of that movie will never, ever be seen again. And every time I watch it, I marvel. Peak verisimilitude. Coppola knew how to do it. But this next article that I wanted to read, that I found, everyone's talking about, you see a lot of articles this week. A lot of ink was spilled about how Star Wars has not made any money for the Disney franchise. They've not seen a return on their $4 billion or $4.5 billion that they spent, if you look at box office breakdowns. But let's talk about that. But the first thing I wanted to read was this article, because I thought it was interesting and pertinent to today. Here it is. It's from Heat Vision. This is from the Hollywood Reporter. Pamela McClintock wrote this on December 9th, 2015, 9 years ago, from Heat Vision. And I thought this was interesting. I thought I'd share it. 5 veteran distribution execs who were there when George Lucas's first installment of the space saga was set to premiere look back on the challenges that came with being a part of movie history. The Force was definitely not with Star Wars in the months leading up to its release over Memorial Day weekend in 1977. Even executives at 20th Century Fox had their doubts. The Other Side of Midnight, based on Sidney Sheldon's Potboiler, was supposed to be the studio's big summer hit, while George Lucas's movie was considered the B track for theater owners nationwide. In those days, film buyers had to bid blind for titles. Trade screenings happened at the 11th hour. The decisions, right or wrong, defined careers. Here, the Hollywood Reporter talks to 5 buyers who were part of the Star Wars revolution after opening on 42 screens. Can you imagine? Star Wars only opened on May 25th, 1977, on 42 screens. They really didn't know what they had. The film expanded to 1,750 screens and stayed in theaters for over a year. On their way to becoming Hollywood players, Eric Loomis, 57, now head of distribution at the Weinstein Company, Chuck Vian, 70, the former head of distribution at Disney, Bob Lenihan, 61, president of programming at AMC Theaters, Travis Reed, 61, head of distribution at Broad Green Pictures. Reed and Lenihan were friends and admitted hippies living in San Francisco in 77, and Larry Gleason, 75, now with Arenas Entertainment. Gleason: I was president of Man Theaters, which had the Chinese in Hollywood and theaters in Westwood. There were a lot of people at Fox who didn't want to make Star Wars. The running joke as that when George Lucas made his final pitch to Alan Ladd Jr., who was running Fox at the time, Laddie said no, but he said it so softly that nobody heard him. Loomis. In the months before it opened, a lot of the older guys thought of Star Wars as a kiddie movie. The cast meant nothing, and no one knew who George Lucas was. I was working for a circuit called Samaric Theaters in Philadelphia. We thought we got hosed because the competition got the big A-track picture, The Other Side of Midnight. 5 years later, the same thing happened with 2 Steven Spielberg movies, Poltergeist and E.T. the Extraterrestrial. The big one was supposed to be Poltergeist. E.T. was an afterthought. Reed. I think it did more or less start that way, Fox making you take Star Wars if you wanted The Other Side of Midnight, but ultimately flipped around. If you wanted Star Wars, you had to play the other film. Lenahan says, I was 23 and booking country towns in Northern California for United Artists, which also owned the Coronet Theater in San Francisco. I tease Travis all the time that the only time I ever won was when he picked The Deep for a theater in Redding, California, while I picked Star Wars. On opening day at the Coronet, there were lines around the block. It played there until Close Encounters of the Third Kind opened in December, and we were still hitting our holdover numbers. Reed says, we hadn't seen Star Wars before we had to choose. I was a rookie buyer at Theater Management, Inc., based in San Francisco, and cocky enough to think my pick of The Deep with Jacqueline Bisset in that wet t-shirt was going to do a lot of business. Vian says, I was at General Cinemas Theater in Chicago and running the Midwest. Back then, movies played in exclusive runs in select cities. I bid for Star Wars and won it exclusively for the St. Park, a struggling theater we had just bought in Minneapolis. I don't recall whether it was the first week or weekend, but the St. Park grossed $250,000 more than it had made in the prior 3 months. Loomis says, the movie played at Eric's Theater in downtown Philadelphia for a year. It was nuts. What I remember most, though, is when it broadened to the suburbs, I was calling around to get the first matinee grosses, and my kid sister Sandy answered the phone at one location. She said she was too busy and hung up on me. Star Wars changed how movies were released. The Empire Strikes Back opened everywhere. Gleason said, in those days you had studio customers. Mann's main customers were Paramount and Warner Brothers. Once in a while you'd play a picture from someone else. Fox's general sales manager at the time, the late Peter Myers, called and said George Lucas really wanted the Chinese. We had 2 weeks available before we had to play William Friedkin's Sorcerer from Paramount. Fox has such limited expectations of the film, he said that 2 weeks would be all they needed. After opening weekend, we went to Paramount, but they wouldn't budge. They said we had to live up to our commitment, but we wanted to keep control of Star Wars. We owned another theater in Hollywood that wasn't very nice. It stayed open 24 hours, so people slept there. We did a crash renovation. We put in new seats, painted it, and cleaned it up. We moved Star Wars there, where it played for 2 weeks before coming back to the Chinese. Vian says, no one could have anticipated that kind of success. You didn't have tracking that spelled out opening weekend grosses or social media. That's how theaters earned their reputations back then. They had a big picture and played it for a long time. And as a film buyer, you shined if you were the guy who bought the right pictures. Lenahan says, it's still hard to fathom. I'm sure this article was written, let's see, now that I'm thinking about it, it was probably written when The Force Awakens was coming out, because it was 2015. So let me look. That was December 9th, 2015. So they wrote this in support of The Force Awakens. One of the things, I've said it on the show so many times, but I thought it was interesting to go back and read that article. For me, Star Wars came out when I was 10 years old in 1977. And I saw it opening weekend. And I was already a fanatical, for at least for half of my life at the time, half of my existence on planet Earth as a 10-year-old was spent in the service of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I had been watching Star Trek, Twilight Zone, and The Outer Limits. I'd watched any Irwin Allen TV show. I'd watched any movie I could watch that had spaceships or aliens in it. War of the Worlds was my favorite movie. until I saw Logan's Run in 1976 and Jenny Agutter drop trow, and I was like, "Woo!" The Love Shop. I loved all that. So, I mean, King Kong in 76. It was a great time to be a kid. But it's always hard to try and explain to people now how Star Wars was something. I mean, everyone knows Star Wars now, but you can't imagine what is it like to see something that never existed before. I will say this: it's a horrible. I'm not making an analogy between Star Wars and 9/11. But the first time I went to New York, one of the things my sister and I did was we went to the top of the World Trade Center. We went outside on the roof. And I stood in the courtyard, that courtyard of the Trade Center, and I was like, this is the biggest fucking building I'd ever seen in my life. I couldn't believe how the footprints, those buildings were fucking huge. And when we watched what happened on 9/11, my brain had a hard time. It had a hard time fathoming what was going on. It also didn't compute with me. It still doesn't. Why anybody would want to do that? Why human beings would? I mean, I understood war, but we weren't at war, and I didn't the ins and outs of all. I mean, maybe we were at war, and we'd been treating the Middle East terribly for many, many years. We reap what we sow. But what I saw was something that was completely foreign to my way of thinking, and it terrified me, to be honest. But when I saw Star Wars, I thought that I was prepared, and I resented the fact. You know how you like your favorite band and they're great, and then when they get great success, you're like, well, I liked them when they were still indie and nobody had ever heard of them. It's like you're resentful that, like I love The Cure, and I remember when they put Disintegration out, which is a great fucking record, But I'm like, well, it wasn't as good as Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. I'd seen that tour, but the fact is, Disintegration's a banger record, and what it did was it catapulted The Cure into the stratosphere. They weren't just darlings of indie rock anymore. They were a big arena fucking band. Even though I did see the Kiss Me, Kiss Me tour at the Seattle Center, or Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me tour at the Seattle Center Arena, where it started with that great, that long guitar riff, and then you had the eyeball on the lips. It was great. I love that. That's just an aside, but whatever. So when your favorite band goes full on, it's like when the Cocteau Twins left 4AD and went to what was it, Columbia or some shit like that. I'm like, what? But anyway, how could that happen? But when Star Wars came out, I thought, because I was Mr. Sci-Fi guy, like the movie was made for me. And it was wild seeing everybody went and saw it. But it's hard to explain when you saw that movie, the way it was done with the visual effects and the verisimilitude of everything that was done in that movie. There was nothing remotely like it. Kind of, I imagine just because it took place in space like 2001 did, it wasn't like 2001 at all. But to see it at that time, humanity had never seen anything like that, especially in entertainment. And nowadays, it's wild to me that Star Wars is going to celebrate its 50th anniversary in 3 years. 50 years old. Star Wars is 50. And it's been so much a part of people's lives. When I see Star Wars now, I've been watching the same shit for 50 years. It really hasn't evolved. We're still talking about the same shit. And I think part of the Star Wars franchise is I think the big problem with Disney, like if you look at the extended universe or the video games, Knights of the Old Republic or Shadows of the Empire, Force Unleashed, call it what you want, Jedi Fallen Order, whatever, X-Wing, TIE Fighter, whatever games you want to play. The thing about the Star Wars universe, it hasn't gone anywhere. I mean, sure, we've got peripherally other stories, but it's still the same thing. Like, Star Trek has had, it's progressed through the centuries. I know we're going to get the Acolyte, but Star Wars, at least as far as the movies are concerned, it's been the same shit for half a century. And not that it's shit, but the problem with Star Wars, the way I see it, is it's been treading water since the end of Return of the Jedi. You're dealing with the same stuff. There's nothing. Star Wars is literally, the people that love it, love it. I love Star Wars, but for me, Star Wars was Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. And Return of the Jedi I thought was a rehash in 83. I've talked about it. Most disappointing movie I've ever seen in my entire life. Because it didn't do anything new. And yes, I love the confrontation with the Emperor, but everyone knows I think the Emperor looks like the fucking witch from Snow White. And that was, I think, a bad choice. And I think George Lucas was perplexed by the success of Star Wars, and I know he didn't like Empire because I read Renzo's book. Empire was too much of an adult movie, and George Lucas was like, we're making fairy tales for kids. No, we're not, Irvin Kershner said, hold my beer. So things change. So the thing about Star Wars is, and they wonder, was it worth it? I mean, Star Wars has been this brand, but the problem with Star Wars is, talk about a stagnant brand. It's been the same shit for 50 fucking years. It hasn't evolved. It hasn't changed. It hasn't moved the needle. And then they made a sequel series where the sequels were literally a rehash of the original trilogy, but bad. I mean, some people like those things. It's fine. But it's wild to me as a franchise. You look at it and people are talking about, well, it's not making... We all love Star Wars. We do. We love Star Wars, but really we love Star Wars because there's 2 really banging Star Wars movies. And of course, we can talk about it all you want, but I was there from the beginning. And I can tell you this. For me, and I read every book, every comic that was coming out, at least the Marvel comics, and then I kind of got out of it. But, I mean, for a while there, Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back were the end-all, be-all, science fiction, fantasy, whatever you want to call it. That was it. That was the fucking gold standard. It was here. You can't explain how amazing those movies were. And when Return of the Jedi came out with a second Death Star, and we can talk about the Ewoks all we want, what they were trying to convey, but it was goofy. You're watching little people in teddy bear outfits. And it was after coming on the heels of Empire Strikes Back, so much of Return of the Jedi is goofy. I understand a lot of people, it was their first Star Wars movie in the theater. But if you're growing up and you want something to evolve, and it was a devolution of a franchise, and it's been that way ever since. Sometimes we'll get a Rogue One and we can talk about, it's a war movie, but they wouldn't even go far enough there. It's still, Andor to me, if you look at Andor, what it was trying to do was probably, as far as a continuation of Star Wars and Empire, not bad. It did something. It was telling a story of the Star Wars universe we hadn't seen before. And I know there's the books and the comics, and there's all different kinds of stories. But Star Wars' biggest problem is it's up its own ass, and it's been there for a long time, and it's not going to go anywhere. And I know people think it's sacrilegious for me to say, but we're still dealing with the exact same story, with the exact same kind of people, the Star Wars universe, which is really interesting, because you could have picked a time. Maybe the Acolyte will be different, but I don't have much hope. But if you looked at our own history, I've been watching Shogun again, and I'm reminded, I keep telling people that something like Shogun, and I said this on the John Campy show, I thought this 44 years ago when I watched the first Shogun. I'm like, I love this because it's a Star Trek story. It's a Star Trek story of a man from the Federation, in the case of John Blackthorne, flying under an English flag or whatever. He goes to an alien world. Culture's totally different. And there's other forces there, call it, in the case of you got the Catholic Church, you got the Protestants, you got all that stuff there already. But you're a total alien. Blackthorne's an alien. Might as well be a Starfleet captain or whatever. Descends into, call it your Klingon culture or whatever. It's a total Star Trek First Contact story. The best kind of First Contact story. And that's why I loved Shogun when I saw it 44 years ago for the first time. And that's why I love this new version of Shogun, because it's still, it's different. It's focused more on Japanese politics and less on Blackthorne himself and his journey. But it's still amazing. And I look at that and I'm like, why isn't Star Trek like this? And it's funny because I see a contrast of Star Trek like Star Wars, especially in the modern age of Star Trek, is it's up its own ass. It's not trying to it's trying to tread water. There's no creators there that look at the franchise and go, okay, let's try and do something totally different with it. And you could say, well, Prodigy, but it's still variations on a theme. Deep Space Nine took the Star Wars premise, Star Trek premise, and did something different. We'd seen space stations, but if Star Trek, the original, was wagon train to the stars, someone could look at, Deep Space Nine was Bonanza. It's the Ponderosa or whatever. What happens when you have an outpost? So they did something new with the franchise. And then, of course, it wasn't everybody's cup of tea, and they went back and they tried to do Voyager, but Voyager was a copy of a copy. And they went back to a format. But Star Trek could really do anything. But it has to fit in the universe that it's in. But so did Star Wars make any money? Has it been making any money? Well, I think that it has. Now, I did find other articles about this. I did find one. There was one in Screen Rant, but Screen Rant to me is not as legitimate, even though I like Screen Rant. But there's an article that was in the Hollywood Reporter on March 14th that I think I'm going to read because it addresses this. How much has Disney made off the Star Wars and Marvel franchises? As it fights off, I mean, obviously this is from March 14th. It was written by Kevin Dolak. As it fights off an activist investor dead set on changing the company's plans, the Bob Iger-led company touted its massive profits from two big bets over the last 15 years. The Walt Disney Company is giving its investors a sense of the massive profits it's made off of Star Wars and Marvel universes since that studio and Lucasfilm became a part of Disney, and it's more than one can shake a lightsaber at. In a presentation posted to the shareholder campaign website Vote Disney, the House of Mouse included highlights of its success with franchises as the company is waging a proxy fight with activist investor Nelson Peltz. Corporate intrigue aside, the presentation reveals some compelling numbers on the high-profile acquisitions Disney has made over the past 15 years. In a section titled Enduring Franchises Highlight Our Powerful IP and Unique Monetization Capabilities, Disney indicates that it has seen a 2.9 times and 3.3 times return on investment after purchasing Lucasfilm and Marvel Studios in 2012 and 2009 respectively. In 2012, Disney paid $4 billion for Lucasfilm, giving Disney ownership of the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises. In a timeline highlighting landmark Star Wars releases and projects since the acquisition, the investor's presentation cites the opening of the Star Tours Adventures continue at its theme parks, the release of 3 Star Wars movies from 2015 to 2019, Disney Plus's franchise series The Mandalorian, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, and Ahsoka from 2019 to 2023, and 3 untitled films anticipated for release from 2026 to 2029. In the filing, Disney suggests that Lucasfilm has generated nearly $12 billion in value to the company. For Marvel, which it bought in 2009 for $4 billion, Disney cites all 4 Avengers movies and the Avengers Campus Marvel Cinematic Universe themed areas that opened at Disney's California Adventure and Walt Disney Studios Park in Disneyland Paris. The 4 blockbuster movies occupy 4 of the top 15 slots on the list of top lifetime box office grossers. Marvel has generated some $13.2 billion in value per the presentation. The 2.9 times and 3.3 times ROI figures, that's return on investment, figures are pulled from company data and reflect the ratio between revenue and investment on titles released following the company's acquisition of Marvel and Star Wars intellectual property, the company notes. Revenue reflects aggregate 10-year revenue streams, both generated and expected, directly associated with the releases including theatrical, home entertainment, pay and free television, and consumer products. Disney also notes this does not include derivative revenue streams such as park attractions, nor does it include originals associated with those franchises or pre-established franchise consumer products revenue. By investment, the figure reflects film production costs, print and advertising associated with theatrical releases. It does not include additional distribution costs or overhead. So here's something that people do not usually consider when they talk about box office of films. Studios have overhead, meaning their operating costs over the course of a year. Now, when film fans talk about movies, we talk about the fact that a movie has to make 3 times or 4 times what it costs to break even, because studios only get half of the box office. So if a movie made $1 billion and the movie cost $300 million to make or $200 million to make, and it costs another $200 million to market worldwide, if a movie made a certain amount of money, like say $1 billion, the studio only gets half of that to cover its costs. Is it a big hit? Or did it only make, I mean, you could make a movie for $200 million that made $1 billion and only make a $50 million profit. A lot of people don't get that. But one of the things that's not taken into consideration, and this is where studio accounting comes in, and a lot of people forget about this, is the studio charges every production for its overhead. Now, this might not seem like it's fair because I've explained that every movie that gets made is its own business. It's a separate business entity that is set up under the umbrella, like an Avengers movie, you know, is set up under the umbrella of Marvel, but it'll be made under something like something LLC. Because a movie has so many moving parts and so many people, it is its own business entity. But what is not usually considered by people when they talk about box office is that Disney Studios, with all the executives that work there and all the people that work there and their support staff, that has to be paid for too. And you can legitimately, I kid you not, and if you wanted to, and this is what happens to indie films, how people get fucked by their distributors. They can charge the overhead of an entire year's or the entire time a movie's in production or it's a life cycle, they can charge the entire overhead to the studio to each movie. And they can show no movies make money. If they wanted to, depending on how they set things up. So, for instance, let's say you're an independent movie distributor, and I know this for a fact because it happened to me. You go to an industry, you go to a small distribution company, not one of the majors, but a small company, and they might have 20 movies that they're distributing, but they might only have 2 or 3 that everybody wants. The rest of their stuff is shit. So, let's say they go to the Cannes Film Festival, to the film market there to sell their wares. Well, it costs them, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go. Well, they might have 20 movies and only 3 of them are selling, but what they're going to do is they're going to charge that Cannes trip to each one of the movies they're selling. So if their Cannes trip costs $300,000, every single movie will have to acquire that they are pitching they'll charge $300,000 to each film before they pay out any money. Even though they only spent $300,000 and they have 20 movies, they'll charge that $300,000 to every single movie, and it will be justified. It's unfair, but it will be justified. Anyway, nobody tends to take studio overhead into consideration because everyone thinks that, you know, oh, this movie made $1 billion. Did it though? Well, who's seeing that money? The people that made the movie? Anyway, while the company's forays into these franchises have received mixed responses from their devoted fans, the financial success they've brought likely means there's much more to come. 2 more seasons of Disney's live-action Star Wars series, The Acolyte and Andor, will debut this year and in 2025, while 2 untitled Star Wars movies are coming, with one focusing on Daisy Ridley's Rey character and another titled The Mandalorian and Grogu, taking the Mandalorian series to the big screen. I mean, let me just say, talk about a franchise that's up its own ass. The Mandalorian and Grogu and a Rey movie. Now, I don't mean to rip on Star Wars, but Star Wars, the word moribund comes to mind. I mean, in terms of a franchise that's truly moribund, Star Wars is that. Star Wars can't do anything. Here you have an entire universe with thousands. I mean, imagine if the Star Wars universe was our universe and we had our own human history to draw on. I mean, think about it. And let's say Earth's history, humanity's history, we'd made a movie about, I don't know, Pearl Harbor, and that became our version of Star Wars. That was our Star Wars canon. Or World War II was our Star Wars canon. We made all these movies, but every movie that we made was set in World War II. You know, but only a certain kind of, it's not like, even in our I mean, how many World War II movies you can have? The Dirty Dozen is set during World War II. Casablanca is set during World War II. Schindler's List is set during World War II. Paul Verhoeven's Black Book is set during World War II. You can tell a million different stories in World War II and never leave World War II. I mean, in all of human history, that you could. There's an alternate universe where the only movies ever made were all set during World War II, told from every person's point of view. But wouldn't it be cool to make a movie about ancient Rome? Like, why don't people look at the Star Wars universe like our universe, like human history? Why is it that everybody's making fucking movies about World War II in the Star Wars universe? I'm using this as a metaphor. It's an equivalency. We're talking about the same goddamn family. Well, what did ancient fucking Rome look like in the Star Wars universe? What does Lawrence of Arabia look like in the Star Wars universe? What do the Dark Ages look like in the Star Wars universe? Why is everything the fucking same? It's like every movie's about the knights of the Arthurian knights. That's it. That's the only people anybody seems to. I mean, people talk about, well, there's the whole criminal underworld. There's that video game with the average looking chick, that whatever that game is. I don't even remember the name of it. It's new. You know what I'm talking about. Like, why aren't people going and making movies about the entire? Like, if you bought Star Wars, why wouldn't you sit down and go, okay, this is a fictional universe that has thousands of years of history, that a lot of it's been established in the games and the books. Why didn't you sit down with a bunch of people that were learned and pay them, get a think tank of 10 people and pay them a decent wage, pay them for 3 months and come in here and say, give me a timeline. Give me a Star Wars timeline. We just spent $4 billion, okay? We have $4 billion. Give me a timeline of the last 2,000 years of the Star Wars universe and show me where we can make movies. And we're going to tell the entire history of the Star Wars universe. Everyone knows Knights of the Old Republic. Say what you want. Darth Revan. I mean, whatever. Malgus. I mean, who knows? But why wouldn't you do something like this? I don't know. Why has the secret hideout era of Star Trek, why is it only sequel or prequels? Why is Discovery a prequel to the original series? Why is Strange New Worlds? You have a whole fucking universe. The original Star Trek shows, Next Generation took place 80 years after the original series. Enterprise went back 150 years before. Then you had Deep Space Nine and Voyager. I mean, you have, but nobody seems. We're only clever enough to make shows that are set in what we've already seen. Why? Human history isn't like that. Why don't you think of? I mean, look what they're doing with Game of Thrones, man. I mean, Game of Thrones. Let's go back and tell House of the Dragon. Still Game of Thrones, but you're going back and you're touching on an era that's been talked about, and you're telling a brand new story that we've never seen that's really fucking compelling. And now they're going to do another movie or another series, the Knight of the Realm or whatever the hell it's called. It's about a knight and a squire that's set 78 years after House of the Dragon. That's how you manage a franchise. And you can tell all the different kinds of stories, like all these different kinds of World War II stories. Tell them about the entire history of a universe. Why aren't they doing that with Star Trek and Star Wars? Why aren't there people in the top when they fucking bought? This is not rocket science. This is like, we've got a fictional universe. Tolkien did it in Lord of the Rings. But it's like, I mean, okay, we're going to go do Rings of Power, but we're not going to use Tolkien stuff because we don't have the rights. That was dumb. We're going to go make up shit. Like, you think you are going to be able to make anything up that works in the universe of Lord of the Rings? The people that are working on that show, are you talented enough to do that? This is the problem with these franchises. The people at the top that buy them are visionless because they're not supposed to be. They're not supposed to be visionaries. They're not. But there are people out there that are. I mean, there's plenty of world-building people out there that know what they're doing, and yet we've got Star Wars is moribund for fucking cinematic Star Wars. It has been moribund for almost 50 years. It's done nothing. It's the same shit. Not shit. because I love Star Wars and Empire. But you know what I mean? You all know what I mean. I think I've been conveying it. It's the same thing. They've got thousands of years of history that's already been established. Whether you like the books, the extended universe, whether you read Tales of the Jedi, the Dark Horse comics, whatever you want. You could have sat down and said, okay, we're going to do 2,000 years of Star Wars history. And we're going to have 3 movies coming out a year that are going to deal with different time frames. And they're going to all interlock, because even though House of the Dragon doesn't necessarily, it has a lineage to Game of Thrones, these are all new characters and different people in different situations. Same universe, but we're going to show you the Dance of the Dragons, totally different story than we ever saw in Game of Thrones. Why not do that? They are doing that there. That's people who know what they're doing. That's how you manage a franchise. Why haven't we seen that with Star Wars and Star Trek? And the thing is, these numbers, Marvel and Star Wars, you'd think they'd be a lot higher than that, but they're not. And I don't have to read any more of this article, but if you want, I'd put the link down below. But that's what I don't understand. I mean, this is not rocket science, and yet it's happened to. And the same thing is true of Doctor Who. Any of these franchises, they're going back, because the people that take over these franchises, first of all, they don't love them. I mean, House of the Dragon, George R. R. Martin came back and was a co-creator of that show. You know, why they look in Hollywood, because everything is about money. If someone comes to you and goes, here, take over this franchise, no one's going to go, no, I'm not going to take that. But you know what? When David Icke and Ron Moore took over Battlestar Galactica, they fucking knew. No one came to them and said, you know, you guys, we got this Battlestar Galactica thing. Bryan Singer's trying to get it off the ground, but then 9/11 happened. And, they had a passion for it. They had a vision for it. And look how that turned out. Not perfect, pretty fucking good. And it's this is not, why don't they do this? I don't understand. I still don't. I'll never get it. But that's why our franchises are because the people making the money decisions, they can't see beyond, well, Star Wars is this thing. It's going to be this. And yet you can't put Luke, Leia, Han, R2, 3PO, Lando. Couldn't put them all together in Force Awakens. I mean, come on. I don't know. RRTNZ says Star Wars original trilogy is like sharks, no evolution needed. Right, but they keep returning to that area. And it's weird. I don't understand. I don't get it. I already got that. Thomas Logan said. Chairman Meow says you reinvented Shatner's career with Free Enterprise, which you can draw a straight line from the Priceline commercials. He got the Priceline commercials after that, but straight line. You never get credit for this. I hope Bill sends you a Christmas card. Well, this is a story of my life, just so you know. You will notice in Bill's new documentary that came out about his career, Free Enterprise is not in it. I don't know why. But it's not. And yeah, I mean, I think that a lot happened. No, I'm not going to say, look, we had an idea about Shatner and we were building on things that happened, the comedy stuff, the elements. But yeah, I think we did do something that revitalized his career. Yeah. Jason Webster says the dumbest decision ever was Kathleen and Lucasfilm not drawing on the EU to make films. They ignored it at their own peril. Well, here's what a lot of people do not understand. When they bought Star Wars, Kathleen Kennedy and I'm a huge Kathleen Kennedy fan. She doesn't know fuck all about comics, or no one knows any. They don't even think about those things. They don't think about video games. That's not real. Anybody that's working in Hollywood, it's not real. Now with Star Trek, they've started to dip in and steal from all the rich novels that they have. I mean, what's gone on under Secret Hideout's tenure of running the franchise? A lot of theft from a lot of other writers who wrote books. I mean, my God, the second season of... If anybody doubts what I'm saying, go read David Mack's Star Trek Section 31 Star Trek novel, Control. Just go read that and you'll be like, oh my God. Yeah. And or go read Vulcan's Glory about Una's backstory. And people say, well, we all own all this stuff. Yeah, really? When Star Trek writers were writing novels, they didn't think you were going to pilfer their ideas for TV shows. That wasn't part of what they signed up for. But yeah, I mean, it's not good. It's not good. But it's all, the thing is, the people they don't think that way because there's nothing, when you're working in Hollywood, people don't know that there's these things even exist. And that's what is incredibly frustrating. Incredibly frustrating. Because there's so many good stories that get passed over that never will get made. And, looking at the thing about Star Wars is unfortunate because we've been getting the same variation on a theme for almost 50 years. And it's kind of weird, to be honest. You have this incredibly deep, huge universe, and we've been getting the idea of stories within the Star Wars universe is so limited. And I always say, if you got a franchise, Game of Thrones did this, you think about human history. Think about all the different stories you can tell about human history, our history on one planet for the last 2,000 years. Why don't people go, okay, well, let's just keep it like within human history. What did we do? What happened in human history for the last 2,000 years? Lay it out. And then just make Star Wars stories about all of that. But nope, we don't get that. So it's kind of a bummer, and it's annoying. So what can you do? Hunter Becknow says, "Put a chicken in it, make it gay." Well, that's another thing. It's interesting because here's another thing that I think is fascinating about our modern age. There's this weird perception that I don't understand that everybody just wants to do everything. Like here's Hollywood, and somehow there's people that have been let in these gates and people that are sitting here waiting to get into the gates. And that there's an equal number of people all over the place that want to do these things. And someone's keeping some of them out and other people are keeping others out. And like somehow this crazy discrimination, or it's a crazy boys club, or they're not going to let you in, or the era of white cis males is over, and blah, 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 blah. Well, I've always thought that was a weird, and we've seen it over the last 15 years, that was a weird way of thinking, because what I think has happened now is we're getting a lot of people that, going into Hollywood's kind of fun. I want to go do that. And, but do they really want to be here? Hey, I'm all for it. But, I talk about people, I always talk about Spike Lee when he made She's Gotta Have It. He wanted to make movies. The people that wanted to make movies, you used to come to Hollywood and they would bust their ass. You'd make independent films, you'd make a splash if you were talented, and you'd work your way up. We saw in the late 80s, we saw Spike Lee make She's Gotta Have It, and then School Days, and then break through and make an incredible all-timer in Do the Right Thing. We saw Soderbergh, make that leap with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and all of those things. And nowadays, there's all these people that get in the industry or want to get in the industry. What have they made? Like, what have they done? How have they gotten into the industry? And the funny thing is, anybody can get in the entertainment business by making something. If you make something that makes a splash, no one's stopping you. And the whole thing about movies is that, for the most part, the idea of trying to make a movie and breaking into the entertainment business was ridiculous. It was the most impractical, stupid pipe dream in the world. And any parents worth their salt would not let their children try and do it. They would do anything you want. They would say anything you want to get you to not make movies. And there's not an equal amount of people. Like if you took every ethnic background in America, you don't have equal numbers of people in all of those ethnic backgrounds that want to get into movie making. And it's a strange thing. I mean, if you have a small percentage, there's always going to be a larger percentage of certain people. If there's a majority in one country, there's going to be more people trying to get into the business from that larger majority than from the smaller minority, because there's less people there's not just less people in that ethnic demographic group. There's a much smaller fraction of people in that group that even want to go into the entertainment business because it's crazy and stupid. Most people shouldn't do it, unless you have a whole passion for it. So it's weird. This idea of DEI has been bizarre to me because the level, like, I've never known anybody who couldn't get into Hollywood if they wanted to work their way up and figure out what they wanted to do. You literally could just go do it. Do you want to go work as a PA on a movie? Well, figure out how to do that. I didn't know anybody in Hollywood. I went to film school. I met people, and then I met somebody, I knew somebody, and got a phone call. The person was coordinating, needed a production assistant. Okay. I wanted to get into, you hang around, you go do things, you work on music videos, you go work on sets, you do whatever you need to do. And I'll tell you something, when I was doing that, nobody cared if you were straight or gay. Nobody cared if you were black or white. Nobody cared if you were a Republican or a Democrat. All anybody cared about was that you did your job well. That was it. That was the only qualification, was you did your job well, and you were easy to get along with, and you were smart. You had to anticipate what people might have needed. That was it, and anybody could get a job. But it required those things. You had to be easy to work with. You had to be smart, and you had to be good at what you did, and people had to be able to rely on you. And you knew to show up on time was to be late. You showed up 15 minutes or half an hour early. It wasn't a whole. That's why I've never known anybody that couldn't. Now, it depends what jobs you want and where it is you want to go. If you expected to be a creative executive or a studio executive, you had to have an Ivy League business degree. That's what you needed. So if you wanted to do that and then go after some track in Hollywood, you could, but you had to have that prerequisite. I could never do that, no matter who I knew. So anyway, I'm kind of off the rails now. I don't even remember. I'm exhausted what I was saying when I started the show. I think it's been fun, though. Have you liked hanging out? I think it was fun. I think we're caught up. Everyone's caught up with and I'll tell you something else. I think a lot of the people that are working in the business are not so much interested in. There's a lot of people in the business today that don't necessarily love the product that they're making. They love that they can bring themselves and put themselves into a product. And I think that's what we're seeing. Whether it's performance activism or what, I don't meet a lot of people anymore that love or have a passion for the movies. They want to get into the business because if you're going to work in TV or you're going to work in movies, you can then bring whatever it is you think you're bringing to everyone wants to be, get accolades or get a reward for bringing these important issues to light. You know what? The best way to do that is to make great entertainment, and make entertainment that has real value, that tells real stories, that have great characters, great situations that really move people, whether it's emotional, intellectual, or whatever. But great stories are great stories, and they're about multiple different things. And now we're getting people that they're not interested in making great stories. They're interested in whatever their issues of the day are. And the thing is, we've always had great issue-oriented films. Some are more didactic than others, but we've always had them, but they're great stories well told. Aaron Brockovich, you have an environmental crusader, sure. Somebody's looking out for the environment. That's important. That's your issue-oriented idea. But also Aaron Brockovich, I know she's a real person, but she's a smart, sassy woman who's salt of the earth that is a self-made person. So forget the environmental angle of that movie. The Aaron Brockovich character, and that's what the movie's based around, is an interesting character. That's what and so that's what makes that movie worth seeing. Nowadays somebody'd be like, we have to make a story about Greta Thunberg and we have to tell everybody about how important the environment is. That's what it is. We have to make sure no, the environment is a byproduct of the story that you're telling. I get that. You can still make an important environmental story. The Verdict, I love The Verdict, and it has a lot to say about the healthcare industry. But nobody would think about The Verdict as being a movie about the healthcare industry, even though it absolutely is. No, it's the story of one man's one chance for redemption. It's a classical story that is set in the world of the healthcare industry. But the important thing is the redemption of the man. And that's the story. The healthcare industry is a byproduct of that redemption story. And it's easy to understand, but apparently difficult for people now to understand it because they achieve or get value from showing everybody, look at how what an activist I am. I'm here to make sure I'm going to right the wrongs of the world. Well, the problem is that's not what stories are about. Stories are about human beings, and righting the wrongs of the world are byproducts of great stories about human beings. You know, the story about Gandhi and everything that he represented is an amazing story, and there's a lot to say, but really what's great about Richard Attenborough's Gandhi is it's the story of the man. Not necessarily what the man did or what he represented. That's there too, but it's the story of this man's journey and how he became who he became. Nowadays, we're getting stories where it's reversed. We have to figure out what we got to come out and, make a movie that advocates for whatever group we're going to advocate for. And then the story and how you're going to tell that story comes later. Because nowadays everybody's more interested in making sure that they're recognized as being the crusaders that they are, rather than being great storytellers. Because there's less value in that. But anyway, on that note, I'm going to end this rambling. I don't even know what I'm saying. And, it wasn't even alcohol fueled. I just have water. I couldn't even get my crunk on. But I love being here with you guys. Thanks for listening to me. Thanks for being here. I hope you got something out of this. It's great talk. And, we're back tomorrow night, 9 p.m. with Dave Parker and Midnight Metal. He's going to talk about the movie he recently directed that you can see. I think it's on Tubi. We're going to have some special guests, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So come back at 9 and, bring your doobage. If you want to have those dank nugs, please do so. I don't have anything against smoking out. Pot puts me to sleep. If I'm gonna have some of the dankest of the dank nugs, if I had some cocaine and ecstasy, well, then we'd have a party. But I haven't done drugs in a long time. I mean, alcohol's fine. I can drink alcohol, but yeah, I don't trust drugs anymore. I used to get such good cocaine and ecstasy. What happened? You know what? What happened to that entrepreneurial spirit selling a great product that you could trust? I'm kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding about that part. Well, I'm not kidding about any of it. But you know what I mean? It's sad. And on that note, remember, I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson and everybody who generously supports this channel via Super Chats and tips. I want to thank everybody who comes and visits these channels. Darth Plato says he's applying for mod status. Really? Okay. It's if that's what you want. Well, Bill, now you're a law. How about that? But I want to thank everybody for being here. Awesome. And of course, what can I say? You all rule, so thank you. Now remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you, have a better night.